The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, folded neatly and stamped with the bold blue logo of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association. Mark Rivera almost tossed it aside with the grocery flyers, but the words "Notice of Violation" printed across the top caught his eye. He sighed, set his coffee down, and opened it at the kitchen counter of the home he had spent 10 years restoring with his own hands. According to the letter, Mark was in violation of 3 HOA rules. His grass was allegedly a half-inch too long, his mailbox was non-compliant, and his work truck was parked in his own driveway overnight. The notice ended with a warning of daily fines if the issues were not corrected within 48 hours. Mark reread the letter slowly, his jaw tightening. He had mowed the lawn 2 days earlier. The mailbox had been approved by the HOA board years ago. And the truck? That truck was how he made his living as an independent contractor. It was clean, quiet, and no different from any other vehicle in the neighborhood. He knew exactly where this was coming from. Across the street lived Linda Hawthorne, self-appointed enforcer of Willow Creek Estates. Everyone knew her. She measured fence heights with a tape measure, reported holiday decorations left up a day too long, and attended every HOA meeting armed with color-coded binders. The neighborhood called her Karen behind her back, but never to her face. Mark stepped outside and scanned the street. Linda's curtains twitched ever so slightly, confirming his suspicion. She had been watching. Later that evening, Mark reviewed the HOA bylaws he had saved digitally and in print. He wasn't careless. He'd learned early on that living in an HOA meant knowing the rules better than the people enforcing them. As he cross-referenced the violations, he realized something important. None of them were valid under the current bylaws. The grass rule allowed a full inch of variance. The mailbox style had been grandfathered in, and commercial vehicles were permitted as long as they met noise and size limits, which his truck did easily. Instead of reacting in anger, Mark smiled. The next morning, he received a second email, this one sharper in tone, signed by Linda herself, now acting on behalf of the HOA. She demanded immediate compliance and hinted at escalating penalties. Mark calmly replied with citations from the bylaws, attached photos and timestamps. He ended the email politely, requesting written confirmation that the violations had been withdrawn. An hour passed, then 2. No response. Mark had a feeling this was only the beginning. Linda Hawthorne did not appreciate being challenged. By Thursday afternoon, Mark's phone buzzed with a new notification, another HOA email, this time copied to the entire board. The subject line read, "Ongoing non-compliance, final warning." Linda claimed Mark had shown a hostile attitude, failed to correct violations, and was now subject to immediate fines totaling $300. Mark leaned back in his chair and let out a slow breath. He had expected escalation, but not this fast. Linda's strategy was obvious: overwhelm, intimidate, and hope he would give in rather than fight. Instead of replying right away, Mark documented everything. He took fresh photos of his lawn with a ruler clearly visible. He photographed the truck from multiple angles. He even dug up the old HOA approval email for the mailbox, dated 7 years earlier. Every file was labeled, time-stamped, and backed up. That evening, as Mark watered his plants, Linda marched across the street. She wore oversized sunglasses and carried a clipboard like a badge of authority. "You still haven't fixed anything," she said sharply, stopping at the edge of his driveway. Mark kept his voice calm. "Because nothing is out of compliance." Linda scoffed. "I'm on the board, I know the rules." "Then you should know the updated bylaws," Mark replied. Section 4.3, subsection B. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Don't get smart with me. People who fight the HOA usually regret it." Mark smiled slightly. "People who misuse authority usually do too." Linda stormed off without another word. The following day, Mark received a certified letter notifying him of a scheduled HOA hearing. Attendance was mandatory. Failure to appear would result in automatic penalties. This was Linda's favorite move: public pressure, embarrassment. She counted on homeowners backing down rather than speaking up in front of neighbors. Mark did the opposite. He prepared a presentation. He printed copies of the bylaws, highlighted relevant sections, and organized his evidence into neat folders, one for each board member. He even prepared a timeline showing when each rule had been revised, proving Linda was enforcing outdated regulations. What Linda didn't know was that Mark had once worked in contract compliance for a construction firm. He was patient, thorough, and very comfortable in formal disputes. The night before the hearing, Mark received one last email from Linda. "This is your opportunity to cooperate," it read. "I suggest you take it." Mark closed his laptop and chuckled. He wasn't going to cooperate. He was going to expose. The HOA hearing room was nothing more than the clubhouse meeting space, but Linda treated it like a courtroom. She arrived early, arranging stacks of papers in front of her seat at the long folding table. A small audience of curious neighbors filtered in, whispering quietly as they took their seats. Mark walked in calmly, carrying a single organized briefcase. He nodded politely to a few homeowners who offered supportive smiles. Word had spread quickly. Linda had targeted many people before, but no one had ever pushed back this hard. The HOA president, a retired accountant named George, called the meeting to order. "This hearing concerns alleged violations at 214 Willow Lane," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Linda, you may begin." Linda stood immediately. She launched into a rehearsed speech about community standards, property values, and the dangers of allowing exceptions. She waved photos of Mark's lawn and truck like evidence of a crime, her voice rising with every sentence. To anyone unfamiliar with the bylaws, her argument might have sounded convincing. Then it was Mark's turn. He stood, thanked the board for their time, and handed each member a folder. "Everything I'm about to say is documented," he began, "and everything Linda has claimed contradicts the current HOA bylaws." The room went quiet. Mark walked them through each accusation carefully. He cited section numbers, revision dates, and approval records. He projected side-by-side comparisons showing how the rules had changed and how Linda was still enforcing versions that were over 5 years out of date. Murmurs spread through the audience. When Mark reached the mailbox issue, George frowned. "Linda," he said, "this approval email is from our records." Linda stiffened. "That rule shouldn't apply anymore." "It does unless formally revoked," Mark replied calmly, which it wasn't. The final blow came with the fines. Mark displayed an email thread showing Linda had issued penalties without board approval, something strictly prohibited under HOA policy. The vice president leaned forward, reading closely, his expression darkening. "That's a serious overstep," he said. Linda's confidence cracked. "I was acting in the community's best interest." George cleared his throat. Intent doesn't override procedure. After a brief closed discussion, the board returned with a decision. All violations were dismissed. All fines were voided. But they didn't stop there. George addressed the room. "We also need to discuss enforcement practices moving forward." His eyes landed on Linda. The audience leaned in. Mark sat back down, hands folded, heart steady. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't insulted anyone. He had simply come prepared. Linda realized far too late that she hadn't just messed with a homeowner. She had messed with the wrong one. The room was quiet after the board returned to their seats. George folded his hands and looked directly at Linda. "After reviewing the evidence," he said, "the board agrees that the violations were issued incorrectly. All fines against Mr. Rivera are dismissed, effective immediately." A soft wave of murmurs moved through the audience. Mark felt the tension finally ease from his shoulders. "But that's not all," George continued. "This hearing has revealed a pattern of enforcement based on outdated rules and individual discretion rather than board approval." He paused. "That puts the HOA at risk." Linda straightened in her chair. "I was just doing my job," she said sharply. "The job requires checks and balance," the vice president replied, "which were ignored." George nodded. "As of today, enforcement authority will no longer rest with one individual. Linda, you are relieved of enforcement duties while the board conducts a formal review. Linda's face tightened, but she said nothing. For the first time, her clipboard rested uselessly on the table. The meeting adjourned shortly after. Neighbors gathered in small groups, talking in low voices. Several approached Mark, thanking him for standing up. One man admitted he'd paid fines he never questioned. Another neighbor said she finally felt comfortable attending HOA meetings again. Mark accepted the thanks politely but didn't linger. He hadn't come to embarrass anyone. He just wanted fairness. Over the next few weeks, real changes followed. The HOA brought in a third-party management company. Rules were rewritten clearly and shared with every homeowner. Violation notices now required multiple approvals, and fines could no longer be issued on impulse. The neighborhood slowly relaxed. Kids played outside longer. Neighbors waved again. The constant feeling of being watched faded. One afternoon, Mark received a final letter from the HOA. This one simple and professional. It confirmed that all violations had been removed from his record and included a brief apology from the board. Mark folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Across the street, Linda kept to herself. No measuring tapes, no surprise visits, just another homeowner. As Mark parked his truck in the driveway that evening, he looked around the quiet street and smiled. Sometimes the right response isn't anger. It's being prepared. Enjoying this intense HOA showdown and how one homeowner stood his ground. Hit subscribe to catch more real-life stories about standing up to authority, community drama, and calm wins in tense situations. Give this a like if you found Mark's approach satisfying, and drop a comment below. Have you ever faced a neighbor or HOA like this, or how would you handle it?